the way this entered into my method of thinking was from reading Michael Oakeshott's Rationalism in Politics. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but like,
Yes.
He breaks knowledge down into essentially two categories: the technical knowledge, which can be learned rationally and read from a book, and practical knowledge, which is something you can only learn by doing.
Yes.
A good example of this is, say, woodworking, something like that. Okay, how much pressure do you need to put down? Well, I mean, they could tell you in a book you need X amount of, PSI of pressure or something like that, but you don't really know what that feels like until you're doing it. And then you pick up the feel of the thing. And it's probably the same with any kind of practical ability like that. And wisdom, I think, is the aggregation of these the things that have been learned through direct practical experience that can't really be distilled down into a body of technical knowledge. As in, you can't really write down what wisdom is and then expect people to rote learn it and then expect them to gain the benefits of it. They kind of have to watch wisdom in process, in practice. And another important part that Oakeshott would bring up about wisdom is that time therefore becomes a component of knowledge. So to have done something for a period of time is required before you can gain the practical knowledge of it. Unlike, for example, anything in a book. You could read a line in a book, right? It took me virtually no time to learn it, and now I know that essentially forever. This is, 2 + 2 = 4. I only need to learn that once, and then it's done forever. But practical knowledge, and therefore wisdom, is not the same. And it's an ongoing process. And like you say, it builds up a kind of tradition that you learn by doing alongside someone who is what I guess we could call a master of the tradition. And this is an entirely different body of knowledge that has no credence in our societies at this point. I think that we lose a lot for that.
We do. And it's interesting because if we go back to Aristotle, we will see a notion of wisdom as skill, which is one of the things that philosophers have tried to capture with the notion of wisdom. So we could talk about a wise trader, or a wise craftsman, or a wise architect. And this is used as an honorific. It's a term that we use to describe excellent practitioners in their field. But I agree with you, as you say, it is not the only way to talk about wisdom. And it is not just that. And the modern world does lead us into thinking that the only notion of wisdom that is relevant to our lives is that of skill.
Yeah.
And we will go to that.
Yeah,
and we will definitely visit Oakeshott's discussion of rationalism and politics. Okay. But let us first try to see the Western tradition, some key people in the Western tradition of wisdom, and let us see how they dealt with it, why they were considered wise.
Okay.
So we have, for instance, the tradition, we have, it starts with the idea of a wisdom tradition. One of the most interesting poets in ancient Greece was Hesiod. And Hesiod in Works and Days, he is considered to be a wise poet and sort of instructor, someone who gives ethical instructions. And it's interesting because if we look at it, he gives instructions that we would consider to be entirely mundane, such as to how to plow a field.
That's very interesting, actually, because I was thinking of Homer when you were saying that, because obviously Homer, containing the moral imperatives that instructed classical Greece on how they should live their lives and what a good and heroic life was. But I wasn't thinking of Hesiod's mundane instructions. But then I'm instantly brought to mind that actually, if you think, like, it never really occurred to me, but on the other side of this, you've got the sort of the poets who are the teachers of Greece through story and song and tradition. And on the other side, you have Plato, who wishes to ban poetry from his perfect republic and rationally order society as a modern socialist would approve.
I think Plato's stance on poetry is a bit conflicting, because on the one hand, he seems to be saying that poets should be banned because they were impious.
They were liars as well.
They were impious. He thought that they were representing gods as being like humans. And this is one of the focal points where Plato is sort of beginning the tradition of monotheism, or at least paves the way towards that.
But there was also something else in it. He at one point in the Republic, he says the poet who represents carpenter doesn't represent carpentry.
Yes.
Because he doesn't know how to do carpentry.
Yeah.
And so he relies on the ignorance of the audience to make his case. And so in a way, he's kind of concealing a lie, which is an interesting way of framing it. He's not wrong.
Yeah.
But there is a kind of presumption of knowledge there that doesn't really exist.
There is this idea that the manual laborer isn't grasping the forms, and therefore this kind of activity is less important.
Yeah.
Than an activity that would involve grasping the ideas.
The philosopher king Plato,
Yeah.
or potential philosopher king, thinks that philosopher kings are the most important thing in the world. What a surprise. Yes. Well, I'm just saying. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to
it's interesting to see also in Plato, if you want to talk about Plato, he has the dialogue called Protagoras, where he talks about 7 sages of antiquity. Yeah. He wasn't the only one who was talking about 7 sages. And again, if we look at them, they were giving advice. So we could see people as giving them, they were giving advice as, nothing in excess. Everything should be in moderation. Or you should prefer friends who speak the truth to you as opposed to flatterers. So again, we see the notion of wisdom, and if you would like sagacity, when we talk about sages, as being linked with advice that is passed on from generation to generation. This isn't the only way to look at it. We can start thinking of what is that kind of thing that bearers of that tradition, or those who followed that tradition, try to capture when they when they use the term wisdom. So I have a small list here. One is the notion of a skill. The other is a power of the mind. So we could say, I appeal to your wisdom, which means I appeal to the power of your mind to exercise judgment.
Yeah.
So we could try to capture either a skill that we're very proficient in using, or a power of the mind to grasp something.
It seems that in the examples you've given there, there's a kind of concealed premise, though, because the wisdom. Again, I can't help but feel that time is a major component of this, because why would I prefer truth-telling friends to flatterers? Because in the immediate moment, I might actually enjoy being flattered. It might be wonderful to be surrounded by flatterers, and I'd feel really good. However, obviously, the wise man would say, well, that may be true then, but in a week's time, these people may just leave you and you'd be left with nothing. But also they may tell you untruths that lead you to make poor decisions. And so much further down the line, you will be in a much worse condition, or a much worse situation, than had the good friend told you the truth at the start.
I think that's correct. And this is because one of the major messages of almost every wisdom tradition is always bear the whole in mind. It is not just to look for your short-term interest. Consider your choices, however they appeal, however they seem to you, or they appear to you, in virtue of how they are going to contribute to your whole life. So this is also one of the things that is told by people who are about to, right before they die, that, I now realize that some of the things that I didn't value as much, I should have valued more.
I'm reminded very much of Solon and Croesus.
Yeah.
Where Croesus says, am I not the happiest man in the world? And Solon said, well, you're not dead yet.
Yes.
How can I know? As far as I'm aware, it's some wrestler in Athens who has got, a bunch of children and then died in glorious battle against, the enemies of the homeland or whatever. I've mentioned that story before because it sticks in my mind that this is a really wise, should I say, way of looking at whether someone is happy or not.
Yes. And
you don't know what can happen next.
Yes. And Solon was one of the 7 sages.
Yeah, he was, yeah.
And he was very much known for his legal work and the legal reforms that he pushed in ancient Athens.
Yeah.
And he also gave advice on mundane things and not so mundane things. This idea of advice is basically in every culture. If you could look also at, let's take a non-Western culture like Indian culture. Some parts of the Vedas, the ancient text of the Vedic tradition, they contain advice about how to cook food.
Yeah.
And of how to deal with snakes.
I've actually, we'll have to do another one of these, going through a bunch of ancient texts. I've got a document that's full of links of ancient texts that are just texts about advice.
Exactly.
I mean, one of them is like the advice of an Akkadian father to his son, which I thought was really great. And it's all stuff that is basically applicable now. You know, don't consort with loose women. Don't get excessively drunk. If you see some people fighting in the street, just go the other way. Very, you know, what we would consider basic things, but timeless things. This is 4,000 years ago this was written, and I would still give this to my own son and say, follow this advice.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.